All right, so welcome back for another deep dive.
Sounds good.
And, you guys got it. This deep dive is into the humor in the song Daddy's Home by Tom MacDonald and Roseanne Barr.
Right.
And I got to tell you, just looking at these lyrics, it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
So we've got the full lyrics that you sent over, and we've got a Forbes article that sums up kind of how the song has been received. And the article calls the song highly controversial.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we're in for a ride here.
Oh, buckle up.
So one of the things that I noticed right away in these lyrics that kind of stood out as humorous was, the chorus is repeated over and over, and it's got this like, we won, you mad, boo-hoo, so sad.
Yeah.
And it's repeated over and over, and it almost sounds like a playground taunt.
It really does.
Like it's so over the top.
It's very childish.
And the way that they deliver it is with this kind of like smug satisfaction.
Yeah.
Where you can't help but react to it.
It's like they're trying to get a rise out of people.
Yes, exactly.
Right from the jump.
And then I also noticed, the repetition of, now your daddy's home.
Right.
And I don't know, it just seems like they're playing on this like authority figure returning kind of thing.
I think daddy is definitely loaded there.
Yeah.
Especially given, like their history and the political kind of climate right now. It's like they're tapping into this.
Yeah.
Like this archetype.
Yeah.
This tough love parent who's like not afraid to say what they think, even if it's offensive.
Right. And it's like they're playing with fire, using all this loaded language to get a reaction.
Sure.
But then you get lines like, you hear pep, 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 pep.
Oh, yeah.
Which is clearly mimicking gunshots. And so it's like, is that supposed to be funny or is it like crossing the line?
It's interesting because, that kind of sonic imagery, like it can be really powerful, but it can also be very divisive.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you could think of it as them like playfully shooting down opposing arguments,
Right.
like a verbal sparring match.
Yeah.
But when you put it with their kind of aggressive delivery and the overall tone of the song, it could definitely come across as threatening or even glorifying violence a little bit.
Right.
So it's tricky.
It's like a really fine line they're walking.
Yeah.
And speaking of walking, a fine line, Roseanne's verse goes right into all the controversy head first.
Oh, yeah.
She's talking about, being canceled and being called racist.
Right.
And it's hard to tell. Is she being funny? Is she just being like raw and unfiltered? Like, what is the goal there?
What's interesting, because she's not shying away from her past.
Right.
At all. She's almost leaning into it like this villain that people see her as.
Yeah, and by doing that, she's kind of reclaiming the narrative a little.
Yeah.
Even if it is through this, like, dark humor.
Yeah, very self-deprecating.
And there's a boldness to it.
Yeah, for sure. And we've seen other, canceled figures use humor in the same way. As a kind of defense mechanism to deflect the criticism or to connect with a certain audience who feels maybe ostracized in the same way.
Right.
So it's definitely a strategy.
And then there's this line that really made me laugh. It's just, screw Eminem, bitch, I'm Roseanne.
Oh, yeah.
And on the one hand, you could just say it's a funny diss at another controversial figure.
Right.
But I feel like knowing Roseanne, there's got to be something more going on.
Yeah, I think there's definitely layers to that.
Yeah.
It could be a jab at Eminem. It could also be her saying, I'm the OG of saying the unsayable.
It's like she's claiming that space.
Exactly. Like I was stirring the pot before he was even around.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like she's not afraid to call out other celebrities who she sees as like appropriating her style.
Right.
So she's really staking her claim as like the original.
Yeah, the originator.
Provocateur.
Yeah. And that's what makes this song so interesting because it's not just the lyrics themselves.
Yeah.
It's the context. Yeah.
It's the history. It's their personas.
Right.
It's a performance.
It's multi-layered.
Yeah. And it's designed to provoke and entertain and ultimately leave a lasting impression.
Yeah. It's definitely a conversation starter.
For sure.
That's for sure. And speaking of conversations, the Forbes article you mentioned describes the song's reception as highly controversial.
Right.
And so I'm curious, do you think that their attempts at humor, like, contribute to that controversy at all?
Oh, absolutely, because humor is subjective.
Yeah.
What one person finds hilarious, another person might find deeply offensive.
Right.
And in this case, you have them using humor to address like really sensitive political and social issues.
Right.
So it's natural that people are going to have strong reactions to that.
It's like they're throwing a grenade into a room and then laughing as everybody scrambles for cover.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
They want the reaction, and the humor is part of it.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple other lines that jumped out at me that I wanted to touch on just briefly.
That I thought were kind of interesting from a humor perspective.
Okay.
One of them is when MacDonald says, I take a bath in the tears of my opponents.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like such a vivid image.
Yeah.
And so over the top and absurd that you can't help but laugh at it, even though it is a little dark.
It's very dark humor. And then there's that line where Roseanne's like, shave your head and wear a shirt that says you're woke. It's like a caricature.
Yeah, it is.
But it also taps into this frustration that some people feel with like performative activism.
Yeah, it's like they're making fun of the idea that just saying you're woke is enough.
Right.
You don't actually have to do anything.
Exactly.
You just got to wear the shirt.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting because their humor, even when it is kind of offensive,
right,
it can spark a conversation.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're highlighting these like cultural flashpoints, these points of tension, and they're using the humor to get people to at least confront them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's a line in MacDonald's verse that I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
It's where he says, you got lipstick all on your beard. You're a man that is cap.
Oh, yeah.
And it feels like he's trying to take like a humorous jab at gender fluidity.
Right.
But it feels a little dated.
It does feel a little dated.
Don't you think?
Yeah, like that type of humor is based on these like stereotypes and traditional gender roles.
Right.
Which just feels a little out of touch with where we are now with conversations around gender identity.
Right, but then again, maybe that's part of their strategy.
Yeah.
Maybe they're deliberately playing with these outdated tropes.
Right.
To challenge, what they see as like the excesses of political correctness.
Right.
It's like, you're going to say what we want, and if you don't like it, tough.
Exactly. They're like the anti-woke warriors fighting against censorship and, whatever they perceive as like limitations on free speech.
Right. And for their audience, that message resonates.
Egg time, yeah.
It's like they've created this echo chamber where their type of humor, no matter how edgy or offensive, is like celebrated as rebellion against the mainstream.
It's a place where people who feel like they're marginalized or silenced or whatever, they can kind of come together and laugh at things that maybe they're not supposed to laugh at.
And it's unifying in a way.
Yeah, totally. It's like a bonding experience. Like we all share these values and beliefs and we can laugh at this together.
Yeah, and that's powerful.
Yeah, humor is really unifying, especially when it's used to like challenge the status quo.
Right. But we also have to remember that humor can be used to reinforce like negative stereotypes and harmful ideologies.
For sure.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, big time.
And it's up to each individual to decide where they draw the line.
Absolutely.
Between funny and just unacceptable.
Yeah, like what are you comfortable with?
Yeah.
And what do you think is just crossing the line?
Right. And so it kind of brings us back to that question we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Can a song be funny and offensive at the same time?
Yeah. Is that even possible?
And I think the answer is yes.
I think so too.
And I think Daddy's Home is like the perfect example of that.
Absolutely.
It's designed to provoke and challenge and make you think.
Yeah. And whether you find it funny or offensive or a little bit of both, that's up to you.
That's up to you to decide. But one thing's for sure, it's a conversation starter.
Oh, yeah, big time.
This song has gotten people talking.
Yeah, for sure. It's a reminder that humor is powerful.
Yeah.
It can unite, it can divide.
And I think as we navigate this increasingly complex world, it's more important than ever to be aware of the impact of our words and our laughter.
Oh, totally.
Speaking of impact, I wanted to touch on another aspect of their humor.
Okay.
Which is the way they play with gender stereotypes.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The whole Daddy's Home theme leans so heavily on this like traditionally masculine image of authority.
Totally. It's like dad's coming home to set everyone straight.
Right, exactly. Like a strong patriarchal figure who's not afraid to speak his mind.
Right.
Lay down the law.
Yeah, and you have Roseanne who's embracing this bad granny persona.
Right.
It's like super aggressive.
Yeah.
Which also kind of complicates the gender dynamics a little bit.
Right. Are they subverting these stereotypes or are they reinforcing them?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
They're playing with our expectations and making us question those traditional roles.
It's a deliberate choice for sure.
Yeah.
And it adds another layer of complexity to their humor.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if they're trying to make a statement about gender or if they're just using it for comedic effect.
Right. Is it a commentary or just a joke?
Right. And it's hard to say.
It's tough to tell.
And, that ambiguity
Yeah.
and that refusal to be easily categorized is part of what makes them so controversial.
Exactly. And also what makes them so relevant.
Yeah.
They're tapping into these anxieties and frustrations that people are feeling. And they're doing it in a way that's both funny and thought-provoking.
Yeah, they're making us confront these uncomfortable truths.
For sure.
And they're doing it with a wink and a smile.
It's like they know what they're doing.
Yeah, they know exactly what they're doing. There's a line in the bridge where Roseanne says, shave your head and wear a shirt that says you're woke.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just such a blatant caricature of like what they see as the opposing side.
Yeah, it plays on all the stereotypes.
Yeah.
And it boils down these like really complex political and social movements to this single image that's easily mocked.
Right. And it's effective.
Yeah, totally.
Because even if you don't agree with their politics, you can probably think of someone who fits that caricature in your mind.
Exactly. Even if it's just like a vague stereotype.
Yeah.
It taps into those biases that we already have.
Yeah.
And it uses humor to reinforce them.
And then it raises the question, is it okay to laugh at that?
Right.
Is it okay to find humor in something that's also offensive?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the answer depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
What's hilarious to one person could be deeply offensive to another.
Yeah.
And that's the power of humor. It's so subjective and personal.
Right. It can unite and it can divide.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
How do we navigate this world where humor is being used as a weapon to score political points?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have an easy answer for that.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with being aware of the power of humor.
Right.
Recognizing that it can be used for good and for bad.
We need to be critical consumers of humor.
Yeah.
And we need to be willing to have these difficult conversations about what's acceptable and what crosses the line.
And remember that just because something's funny doesn't mean it's not harmful.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Daddy's Home, I think it's important to take a moment to appreciate the complexity of humor and to acknowledge that it can be a source of joy.
Yeah.
But also a tool for division.
For sure.
And as always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep listening.